Greetings, fanboys and fangirls. Jared here with another video review from Fanboys Forever. Today I'm bringing you a review of the brand new Mezco 112 Collective Ultraman figure. This 6-inch figure has been something that I've been looking forward to for quite some time, being a big fan of Ultraman, and especially since Shin Ultraman came out and kind of revitalized the brand, especially with a lot of the awareness in the West. It's something that I've really been looking forward to. Of course, this figure isn't based on that new version of Ultraman. This is indeed the original classic 60s Ultraman that became incredibly famous during that time period in Japan. Of course, since those days, Ultraman has gone on to spawn hundreds upon hundreds of episodes of Japanese television, with some international endeavors as well and some attempts to bring Ultraman west, but it's never really took over here the way that it has in Japan. But that doesn't stop me from absolutely loving this tokusatsu series that was so influential. Basically taking the giant monster craze that had been ignited by Godzilla and King Kong and bringing it into people's living rooms as a television series from Tsuburaya in Japan. But of course, we're here today to talk about the figure and how it holds up and if it's a good translation of the show. And you can see that I have reassembled my big diorama and all of that, so I'm definitely ready to talk about it and I'm very excited. Of course, we understand what the giant shoeboxes are like from Mezco, and this just has some beautiful artwork on the front, very reminiscent of some of the more recent comic appearances. Down here we even get an official Tsuburaya Productions holographic kind of sticker, so I really think that that's cool. I also like the authenticity of Ultraman being in Japanese at the top. There's some lovely artwork on the side as well, and on the back, unsurprisingly, we get a nice little rundown of the figure and everything it comes with. And although it certainly sometimes seems like most of the Mezco items I review are indeed store exclusives, not this one. This is a general release item. Anybody who wants this Ultraman should be able to find him no problem at places like Big Bad Toy Store, Entertainment Earth, or even your local comic shop, so I don't think you'll have any trouble finding this guy. The retail price is right around $105, depending on what kind of markup you see at those retailers. I got mine on the wait list at the actual Mezco site. With that out of the way, let's begin. Definitely looking at the visual aspects of the figure, there's a lot to love. So one thing to note is that I have the light up features on, and we'll go over those a little bit later. Just so you know, without those light up features on, just so that I'm not misrepresenting the product, this is what it looks like. But I like having them on because his eyes and color timer are always lit up like this. So I'm really happy to just have them on throughout the review. Just be aware of that. So let's start with the head. The original Ultraman from the 60s definitely has this almost rough kind of texture, this sort of space age look, but it's kind of imperfect. And that's definitely what this captures here, whether it's intentional or not. I love a little bit of, the kind of texturing, almost like it looks like a handmade mask. And very much, the low-tech solutions that they were going with back in those days at Tsuburaya. This is accurate, and I'm going to get into more of that with other aspects of the figure too as we go. I also think the shaping of the helmet is absolutely perfect, and key to Ultraman's look are the big lips right there and the little chin. Love the ears over there on the sides, and of course the point at the head, perfectly separated, and this piece is removable for batteries and such. On the back, Ultraman does have his classic fin. Now, it's kind of interesting because it doesn't really want to stay out like a shark fin like it should. Instead, it wants to fold to the side, but the truth is that in the actual show, it sometimes does the same thing. And of course, one of the reasons this is here in the show is to hide the zippers and things like that to get the actor in the suit. So it's definitely understandable. I think it's interesting that he's in this kind of pleather outfit. We've seen Mezco pull this trick many times before with other figures like, say, their symbiote Spider-Man and things like that. And I think people are always worried about these types of suits, and I completely understand why you would be. There's definitely, of course, always the concerns about what the material is going to do over time. Just to get that out of the way right at the beginning, I'm not having really any problems with these materials right now. It is that kind of vinyl-y material. I think the one thing that you're going to have to be aware of is that over time you're going to have some creases in it from prolonged posing, And you can already sort of see that start to happen at bend points, like right here on the inseam of the elbow. And I'm actually okay with this, and there's a good reason why, because in the actual show, the longer they use different versions of the Ultraman outfit, he gets all those same creases at those same points in the body. So I really don't have any issue with that. And as a matter of fact, the more I pose him and the more I use him, I feel like that's just more accurate to the actual suit actor. And for me, I always want a figure that's representative of an actual actor in a suit from Toku. It's one of the reasons I don't like the Zap Megazord that they did, the Dino Megazord, which is of course Daizujin from Zyuranger, because it doesn't look like a guy in a suit. It looks like their fantasy version of it, where he's this mecha that's meant to look a little more gritty or something, and I just really don't like that. I instead want it to look like the actual Toku actor, the person who's inside of the costume trying to make this thing work, because to me, that's the magic of it. So taking that into account, we'll look at the actual bodysuit itself. You can see here that Ultraman has his color timer that lights up right in the middle of his chest. And this isn't just a transparent lens that has a light coming through it. There's actually speckling over it to give it a little bit of added detail, and you can just barely see it right there. But I think that's tremendous. If you're unfamiliar with the color timer, it basically lets Ultraman know that he only has just a couple of minutes left to stay in his giant Ultraman form, because it expends too much energy. Moving on down, we can see that it uses a standard kind of muscular Mezco body, and the great thing is this fabric over it shows enough of the musculature to be convincing. Like, you can definitely tell there is a guy in there and he's probably padded up. But the great thing is it doesn't go too crazy. Like, you know, we see the chest here, but it's not like huge, like, you know, he's this 90s comic art superhero. So I think it's just muscular enough. Truth is, this is probably beefier than what the actual suit performer looked like in the actual original show. I just think it depends. I think a lot of the times, you know, they were padded out, but really the proportions are just about dead on. And one of the ways they're able to cheat that a little bit is by having the head be just a little extra large, I think. And it ends up shrinking down some of the proportions enough to where it sells it as being slightly more slender. And what I really like is, whether it's intentional or not, one of the things that I always notice about the suit performer in the original Ultraman is how barrel-chested the upper part of the chest is, with the ribs almost like they're wearing some kind of padding harness just up here but not down here. And I think it works really well. You get that silhouette going. So I really do like that. And I'm sorry about how basic the posing is right now. I will definitely show you some better poses as it goes. I also love the silver here. I'm not sure what they did to achieve it exactly, but it's almost completely indistinguishable from the silver being used just in the paint on the helmet here. And it's great because with something like this, it would be really easy to mess up. So I'm really glad that it looks as good as it does. And not only that, but even with all these soft goods, they still have like a turtleneck or just a neck piece sewn in right here. And it's amazing because as you flex the head, it really does look like a full-scale costume where you would get those bends right there in the neck. So I think that's awfully impressive. I also really like the stitching work. You know, sometimes this is not as good as it could be, and other times it's really nice on Mezco's. The stitching work is really resolute. I think they've done a great job here. It doesn't look awkward or anything like that. They've just gone around the entire inseam and they've stitched it all the way down. A lot of the stitching to actually, I think, get the figure inside of it happens right here on this side and this side as well. And I think it ends up coming off pretty well. I've seen stitching disasters on Mezco figures before, but these look really nice and it doesn't look like there's any openings or anything. I think that the moral of all of this is, with all this vinyl being hooked together, or pleather or whatever it is, with all of this stitching, I wouldn't fight too much against this suit, because what you'll do is you'll take the pleather will rip through the stitching a little bit. Everything looks really good down here along the knees and to the boots, and they did a great job of fooling me, because at first I wasn't really sure what was going on down here, but till I got a better look. This looks like an interconnected boot, doesn't it? But the truth is, this boot is a completely separate plastic piece that's just floating over top of the bodysuit. That's how close the silver is. It is so hard to tell that anything is going on here other than it just being there and actually being a part of it. Over here it gives it away a little bit because they have a thread doing the stitching. But other than that, it's a pretty seamless illusion, literally, in this case. So I am very impressed sculpturally. I think everything looks incredible. So let's go ahead and just have a look at some of the articulation, because I feel like that's a really important point and something we just need to go ahead and talk about. With the head, you're not going to have any limitations because of the light up feature, because all those batteries are housed inside of the head and not some kind of weird thing in the neck. So I'm really glad to say that that's the case there. You can definitely go left and right plenty, and he has the ability to cock the head just slightly both ways, plenty enough for anything you probably need to do. And he can look up a little, and that's probably the most disappointing aspect, is because Ultraman is a flying character. You really need him to be able to look up more than this. I mean, you can definitely work with this because down here at the torso you can bend it up to get him into those flying poses, but I still wish he had looked up more. He can look down just a tiny little bit, but it's not much, so there's not a huge amount of range right there, and not as much as we really needed. With the arms, these are of course going to be interesting. They feel a little stiff, and I definitely feel like I want to get them by the shoulders up here and push them and work on them, and not try to pull way out here, because I feel like that might not be good for the bicep joints. Basically, you can put the arms up, and as you do, you'll see that you get some creasing over here starting to happen. And you can minimize this by twisting the fabric, and I always talk about this in Mezco. If you just twist enough, you can kind of get it to do what you need to do, but you have to be patient with this. You don't want to be really brash with how you pose this around, because what I would be worried about is somehow the silver or the red would break, and that you would actually see the lines in here from the wear. So I think that you can get the poses you want. It's just a matter of being careful and understanding that yes, once you start posing him around, you can see it happening. You're going to have creases in here, but also understanding that that's what the suit looked like in the show. This is very, very accurate to the original series, and in that original series that you would see all these creases and everything all over the suit where the stunt performer had really, been putting it through its paces. You definitely do get a double jointed elbow. Now if you leave it like this, you're probably going to have more intense creases, so I don't leave it like that too long, but to get your photography you can definitely do that and then have it back out. There is a rotation there at the bicep, but again, if you want to rotate that bicep, you're going to have to kind of move it independently of the sleeve and then work the sleeve back down around it, which isn't too bad of a problem. If you want the arms straight out, that's probably a good amount to be able to do. You could probably do more, but for me, that's plenty. Down here at the hands, you have the ability to go up and down with them and turn them all the way around. And of course, the arms can go back if you need them to. And again, you see what I'm doing. I'm twisting the sleeve to make it work, and that works actually really nicely. You can bring it in if you like, just whatever you need to do. It's not really so much of a matter of limitation with this. It's just a matter of patience, just working with it, not working against it. Now at the chest, I always like a lot of diaphragm articulation in my Mezcos, and this one doesn't disappoint. You can see he can go way back if you wish, so that will help with flying poses. And you see how when you're moving him around, you can accidentally press the button back there, and I'll get into that button here in a minute, and you can turn off the light feature accidentally. And he can definitely go forward if he needs to. I feel like it was easier to go back than to go forward, but yeah, you can definitely go forward. You can see the outfit kind of bunches up a little bit, but it's really not that bad. It looks pretty decent actually, even with it bunching just a little, and you can manage that. See how I'm working the legs to stretch it back down? You can do that. It's very forgiving with the way you work with it, actually. I don't feel all that inhibited. I just feel cautious as I'm working. That's it. And you see, the more you work, the more you can get these more natural kind of lumbering poses as he's just kind of making his way through the city. Of course, Ultraman is gigantic, so keep in mind this is not like your regular Super Sentai character or Kamen Rider where he's human-sized. Ultraman himself is a giant kaiju of sorts. He just happens to be super heroic. Now down here at the legs, you can see that there's definitely some motion you can get. You can bring them together like this, You can get them to come out quite a ways, and I'm sure you can go even further than what I'm doing, but honestly, this is what feels good to me. I wouldn't want to go any further than this because you don't want to put strain on these stitches. This could be the inflection point for some of that strain, so you don't want to go too crazy. So I was experimenting with them a little bit, and definitely with the legs, there is some more range, but you have to know how to trick it. The way to kind of trick the costume into doing what you want it to do is to pull up on the pants. You see this? How I'm bringing it up, and you kind of bring it into the midsection right there. Okay, once you do that, you will get more range. It unlocks the rest of the range. It's look at it like a drop down hip or something, except you are pulling the fabric up into the midsection. And you can actually get pretty well a full kick range once you do that. You can go beyond what a lot of Mezcos can do, and you can see that there's no strain on the stitching because you're giving it more slack by taking the pants up, and it still leaves enough room for the boots not to be disrupted down here, like the illusion is still there. So if you want Ultraman to do those ultra kicks, you can totally do it, and it's not going to really be a problem, which I'm very surprised by. At first, when I was working with it, I didn't think you really could, and I even filmed an alternate articulation thing where I was like, oh yeah, you can't really do much. But the more I worked with it, the more I was like, yeah, wait a minute, you can totally do this. I was wrong. So very impressive. There isn't really a lot of articulation hindrance in this figure. You can do what you need to do, and you're not going to have a whole lot of trouble doing it. So I just keep having fun trying to find ways to cheat things and get it to do things that maybe it wasn't even intended to do. And what's amazing is I kind of thought this would be like one of those minefield figures where you're just like, you're afraid to do different things. But no, I find that it's more the type of figure that encourages you. It kind of just feels interesting to work with, and definitely not this like frustrating nightmare to work with. So you can see that there is a double joint knee right here. And of course you're going to have a lot of creasing back here, and a wise thing might be to just take this and pinch it out just a little to avoid getting it stuck in all of that, and then it will probably do it a little bit better. There's also an upper thigh swivel right there. You can kind of see it working. Again, you would just have to pose it independently of the costume and kind of just work the costume around it. Down here, there is some really good ankle rocker pivot, and there's an up and down, and Ultraman's shoes are pointy as they should be on the toe right there. For me, Ultraman's battle pose that I've always liked is his grapple pose, where he's like this, about to take out a monster. My mark of quality on a figure like this is, can he do a convincing ultra grapple? And with it's a very specific thing, and once you watch the show for a while, you definitely know exactly what it is, where he's kind of got his knees bent forward, he's angled downward a little, and his head is up, and there's the two hands kind of put together like this. Oh yeah, it's a really lovely way to pose him. I think it works nicely. Now, I'm happy to say, even with all of the extreme kind of posing you've seen me do, once you return him to a standing pose, most of that resets in terms of creases. But please do understand that yes, there are going to be some residual creases left. You can kind of see them right there. But again, to me, it's a feature, not a bug, because it makes it even more accurate. The more you mess with it, the more accurate it becomes to the original Ultraman because of those creases, because of that kind of roughness to that original suit. And of course, there's different versions of the original Ultraman suit. And people who are much more knowledgeable about the brand than I am will be able to point out which versions are which, and which version specifically that this figure is trying to capture. I would imagine this is the more refined version that they had by the end of the show. But, you know, don't take my word for it. So I think Mezco did a good job selecting accessories that would make sense for this release. I'm going to start with what I consider to be the most important accessory, which is an alternate hand for his Spacium Ray. Now, the Spacium Ray is Ultraman's kind of big attack that everybody knows him for. It's like Goku in the Kamehameha. Let's be real, the pose that probably 90% of people are going to be keeping him is the Spacium Beam pose, where he's firing it off with a classic kind of T shape or cross shape with his arms here. And thankfully he has just enough articulation to really make this happen and make it look good. And I'm sure with a little more time I could adjust it to make it look even better, but I really think this is great, and he looks nice doing it. Looks great from all angles too. Of course, Ultraman does come with, I believe, a total of 12 different hands, and some of those are fists, and you're going to need it so that Ultraman can use another effect. One of Ultraman's classic attacks is the Ultra Ray, and you can see that all you have to do is pretty much just guide it over the arm right here, and it just sets over it. So there's nothing complex about this necessarily. It works well for what it is. The further out you go like that, then the less dig it's going to have on the hand. You can take it either way if you want to, but you know, it's pretty cool. It's not something I'll probably use very much, but it's neat to have. So one effects piece you can use is the Ultra Slash effect, and of course it's a classic attack that he uses in the show. It wants you to use these two hands, almost like praying hands right here. I think that definitely if I wasn't trying to review the figure and trying to get through to the other parts, and if I had a little more time to work with it, I could probably make it hold better, but I'm struggling to get the hands close enough together to give it the friction it needs to hold it in place. And I'm sure you can. I'm sure that that if you work with it enough, yeah, there is kind of decent. If you work with it enough, you can probably get it just fine, but just know that it's not an automatic thing, and it would have, I think, served a lot better maybe utilizing a magnet of some sort, because that's a whole lot to stake on a figure in 12th scale being able to put its hands together tight enough to hold something like this. I still like it though. And keep in mind that Ultraman has basically every type of hand you can imagine with a total of 12, from grasping hands to open hands to just flat hands for flying. It's worth pointing out that he does include this really nice display base, and I think it looks great. Like with practically every Mezco display base, it does come with this alternate cradle piece so that you can put him in flight poses. I feel like most of the Mezco figures I get don't need the flight stand, but this one does. And with practically no effort at all, you can have Ultraman flying around in no time, and I think he looks really nice. I also think that since you're able to use that diaphragm, it kind of helps with the head not being able to go up so much. So I think it ends up being a forgivable thing because you're able to kind of cheat it in other ways. But I think that looks really nice. Yeah, I think they did a great job. And the one thing I would say is just watch it with this cradle right here, because even though it doesn't look like it made any marks on the torso, you don't want this to be clamped down so hard that it makes a big mark right through. Of course, one fun addition that Ultraman includes is the Jet VTOL. This is, of course, a ship from the show, and I really like this because it kind of has this great miniature quality to it where it seems like a little prop you might have actually seen used in the show. They were, of course, always using little miniatures and that were flying around on strings. They were on the cutting edge at that time, for as quaint as it seems now, of implementing all of these cost-effective miniature effects just in a weekly television series. So I think the detail on this is really nice, and it looks like it came straight out of the show. And of course it scales really well with Ultraman himself, and that is about the right size. Another cool feature that a lot of people may not know about are these buildings that you're seeing at Ultraman's feet, and I'll move some of my stuff out of the way so that it's a little more clear about what you're actually getting. So each one of these buildings, you get 5 in total, are something that's actually included. All 5 of these have the ability to break away like this. So if you want to, you can have it be a really epic battle, and this one kind of has some friction that allows it to stay together, so I think that works out really nice. And you can have a completely destroyed, like trashed city instead. I actually think the detail on these is pretty good too. And you can see the little apartments and kind of little windows. They're all, you know, the same color, but I like that. I think it looks great. And you can have Ultraman standing in the rubble from, clearly, not that he caused, but, you know, some monster out there. But of course, rest assured, it takes no time to put the buildings back together. One more significant accessory that Ultraman includes is the Brothers Mantle Cape. This is something that the Ultra King wears in Ultraman continuity, and it grants the wearer with extra powers. Of course, the original Ultraman here is one of the Ultra Brothers in the continuity of the show, and they wear these capes a lot. I think it's supposed to show kind of honor for the legacy of Ultraman, and kind of granting, like, you know, retired Ultraman status, like legendary Ultraman. You know, we're going to cape you like Elvis or James Brown. And it's kind of a symbol of pop culture respect, if you will. And it amazes me how good it looks on the figure. Like, really, that is nice. And this is the kind of thing you would think for sure would be kind of poorly implemented, or it would look a little funny or out of the scale. But no, it is really good. And you might have noticed that there was actual wiring in the collar too, not just on the actual cape itself. So it allows you to do all kinds of great things. And that just looks perfect to me right there. I don't even want to fool with it. I don't even feel like messing with it anymore, because that is just so right on. And even from the back, it just looks so epic. So yeah, definitely this is Ultraman getting the honor he deserves with his nice cape. Of course, I was meaning to talk about the light up feature a little bit more and how that works, and another accessory that he comes with. So there's a button back here that you can just feel like a bump right there on his back. And I turned it off just then. And you turn it back on and it stays on. As far as I know, it doesn't go off on its own, but I'm not sure. The way that you access this is the front of the face is actually a plate that is separate. I haven't actually took the full head off, so I don't know how easy that is to do. You see, this just pops out right there. And then you're left with this gruesome Jet Jaguar looking guy. And it's kind of like a faceless Ultraman. And you can see that you can still pop on those lights if you want. But he does come with an alternate faceplate. Of course, it's Ultraman firing his I-beams right here. And you can see that this is with the light off, and this is with the light on. Now, if I had my lights down a little bit, I think it would be a little more obvious to see. But I think you get the idea. It's just cool that they included this as an option. And just so you can see, it does pretty well reach down to where, I guess, if you needed him to blast something on a building, you could do that. And you could even kind of balance him with that to kind of cheat it a little bit. So it works pretty nicely. And again, just taking a brief moment to just show you just how dynamic your posing can get with this Ultraman. I just continually want to fool with it and just try different things and just see how much fun I can have with it. And it's just great to see him get this kind of deep posing where there's a whole lot of personality in there, and it really does start to look more like a miniature effect after a while, or something you could put in stop motion and use as a practical effect in one of these old, like, Ultraman, or in an Ultraman fan film or something like that, because it really does look nice. For future reference for anybody who needs it, Ultraman does include these instructions about the different ways to utilize his accessories, and they're all very self-explanatory. Of course, Ultraman includes the classic Mezco 1/12 baggy accessory, something that hasn't changed at all since the very beginning. You do get those free little goodies that it comes with. I got the red pack variation, which is maybe my favorite one because of the horror vibes you get with this little guy. And so, probably a good bet that we'll not get any other villain characters or anything to go with Ultraman. Now, I could be wrong, and Mezco has certainly surprised us before. I would love to see Red King or any number of Ultraman villains. You know, it might not happen. So my goal is to show you some options that you have to maybe give him something to fight. Some of these will just be funny, some of these will be legitimate, so here we go. Why not start with a Mezco monster? It's the Mosquatch. And to me, this is all kinds of fun. If you want to put these guys together and have them have this big battle of these titans and say that Mosquatch just got huge, then go for it. And I think they really look fun together. So if this is something you want to do, go for it. We'll go off the beaten path a little bit with something a little more unexpected. I quickly looked through some of my old figures and thought, what's going to be monstrous, something that he could fight that would be in a pretty decent scale. And I thought, hey, maybe this is what we can use the absolutely bizarre release of the Bat Monster from Mattel, from Batman v Superman on that first wave. And oh my gosh, what a weird figure. Regardless, this is certainly something you could do if you wanted to. Of course, there's any number of Power Rangers Lightning Collection villains that are, of course, Toku villains that are ready-made for this guy. They're all really big, but they work. And you could use something like iGuy if you wanted to, but just be aware that these guys are not only too big for the Power Rangers, they're a little too big for Ultraman. Something I'm always drawn to use as giant villains, and they feel very much kind of like a Toho Frankenstein in a way, we have right here the Raphael Frankenstein's monster from NECA. And definitely for whatever reason, this just gives me the right vibes. I don't know, but I like it. Something that I think probably makes a better generic Toku villain, even though it's an American creation really, is the Tengu or Tenga, depending on what you're looking at, warrior right here from Power Rangers Lightning Collection. I think that that looks really cool and looks like a giant bird monster that Ultraman might fight. I saw someone use the crocodile from G.I. Joe Classified the other day that came with Crocmaster and just had Ultraman wrestling it, and I think that could look really good depending on your photography and how creative you get, but you certainly can't stand him up as a bipedal monster. Speaking of bipedal monsters though, you certainly can, if you so desire, use Toka from Turtles 2's Secret of the Ooze. He's pretty big, and you definitely want to keep those spikes away from Ultraman's bodysuit because I feel like they would make some long-lasting impressions in them. But I think it still looks pretty neat and kind of looks like something he would fight. And of course you can use things like Mattel's Jurassic Park line for plenty of that kind of thing. You just have to find the right size to make it work. And in that same vein, you can even get a little more adventurous in terms of size with some of their more super articulated dinosaurs and definitely get some cool stuff. I think the one thing is it looks a little too legit for old school Ultraman to be fighting. Like it almost seems a little too intense looking and too high budget for something Tsuburaya could have done in the 60s. If anybody has this, the Raw 10 stuff from McFarlane they came out with, like the giant snake, you can totally do that and it works pretty well. It's a little big, I think, for Ultraman, but I sat him on some buildings over there and I think it looks pretty neat. It just doesn't quite fit the style. Get Pudgy Pig in on the action from Power Rangers. I think that's pretty fun. It's neat. It's nonsensical, but it's neat. If you want Ultraman to have a team up with the Power Rangers, even though the Power Rangers should not be as large as Ultraman, unless you look at that final episode of Zeo, isn't that where they get like really big because they can't get their Zords or something? It works pretty decently. Ultraman, I have him hunkered down a little bit, and that's the only way I think that it looks pretty decent. Ultraman's a little bit taller than these guys because the Lightning Collection are very small 6-inch figures. You have the Rathtar monsters from The Force Awakens, and I always use these in photography. You guys probably are sick of seeing these in like Ultraman reviews, but they're just so versatile, and depending on how you do your photography, you can make them look bigger or smaller as needed, and I think they're great monsters. And you can find these guys at like discount chains and super cheap online. Our old friend Bachula here can definitely fight Ultraman, and he's in really good scale with him too. Of course, I have Bachula standing straight up, and we will give Ultraman the dignity of his full height as well. And with that in mind, you can see that they scale pretty much right eye to eye, so there you go. And of course, I know there's one in particular you've all been waiting for to see Ultraman face off against, and that's Prepare Yourself, Ultraman. Alf! Willie! Help! I don't know, it looks pretty fun. Yeah, sure, why not? And I certainly can't say it's not a well-balanced figure. I was able to balance Alf in there just for a second, but he came crashing down. Honestly, when it comes to an opponent for Ultraman to fight, I think the most obvious thing and maybe the most effective thing you can do is just to throw in a Godzilla. Just like Tsuburaya did with old Godzilla costumes at times, they would modify these suits for Ultraman to then fight. Maybe Godzilla here is just ever so slightly too big. I'm not really sure. I think it looks pretty well right on though. You could definitely customize an old Godzilla figure from NECA or something to look more like one of those classic suits that they modified and used themselves. So that's just an option for you. I know what you're thinking. He needs to fight the Red King, right? There you go. Yep, that's the 5 points version. Not gonna work. However, though, it is fun to see Ultraman alongside of his 5 points counterpart. And there they are. It's amazing just what a difference you can see. Of course, Mego has been producing a lot of good mass market Ultraman merchandise. And it's really nice to see these out, just to have some good brand presence just out in mass retail. Here's their standard Ultraman figure. And it's a good bargain for what you get, but there's no comparison, of course, to Mezco's outing. Well, friends, that will certainly do it for my review of the brand new Mezco 112 Collective Ultraman. I think this is a great release. I've had a great time looking at it, and he is just so awesome. He's definitely able to do a whole lot more than I thought he'd be able to do, articulation wise, and I think that the details are just wonderfully accurate to the old show. Combine them with the really cool diorama pieces that you get and the VTOL over there, and of course adding a little bit of spruce of your own like I have with my setup over here, and you've got something that is really camera ready when it comes to looking like an authentic recreation of that original costume. Of course, Ultraman is absolutely formative to the toku that we enjoy today and is one of the biggest superheroes in the world when you look at international audiences. So it's definitely appropriate that we pay homage to this character, and this is definitely a figure you shouldn't miss. I have a feeling this may be one of those sleeper hit kind of Mezco figures. People are probably going to look over it for a while, and you're probably going to be able to get some good deals on it, honestly. And I think that's awesome that you'll be able to take advantage of that. However, I also feel like there'll come a day when lots of Ultraman fans won't be able to find this guy anymore because people finally discovered just how great he was. Well, don't let that happen to you. Go ahead and get him while you can. I do know that it's getting harder and harder for me to buy Mezcos because the price is just really high and I have so many other lines that I like to collect and money is limited. So for me, Mezco points helped out a lot and was probably one of the only ways I would be able to own this guy, and definitely a reason why you've seen Mezco content slow down on this channel a little. It's just expensive. So I'm not sure if you would get the same kind of thrill out of this guy unless you're a fan of the character like I am. But if you are, you really can't go wrong with this guy, and I strongly suggest that you give him a try. And for the asking price of $105 or less, since he is a general release, you'll probably be able to find him more around 90 or 95 shipped in a whole lot of locations. So for that reason alone, he's a little bit cheaper than most other Mezco products and just as nice, if not nicer, in many ways. So I definitely suggest that this is the kind of thing you might want to take a chance on. Who knows, you may have more fun than you think. And Ultraman is just an excellent show to watch, so if you've not seen it, definitely give this charming show a chance. Looks like my color timer on my chest is flashing red, meaning that I don't have much time left. So with that in mind, I better wrap up, and God bless you and yours. And I'll see you on Fanboys Forever. Fanboy out.